A lost firefighter and a lone wolf forge a silent bond in the wilderness, surviving fire, hunger, and snow to rediscover purpose. Join us on this journey of quiet courage, unexpected companionship, and subscribe for more stories waiting to be told, each one a reminder that sometimes the wild understands us better than we know. Smoke curled like ghost fingers through the blackened trees, weaving a mournful lullaby through a forest that had once been alive with sound. Now, everything was hush, charcoal trunks clawing at a pale, ash-colored sky. Not a bird. Not a breath of breeze. Just the distant groan of something heavy collapsing in the burnt woods, followed by silence so deep it pressed into the chest like grief. Cass Monroe didn't remember falling. 1 minute she was pushing forward through the heat, trying to outrun the wall of flame devouring the ridgeline, and the next, darkness. A misstep on scorched rock, a snapped branch, gravity doing what fire couldn't. Her world had tumbled into fragments. Pain, smoke, panic. Now she lay half-buried in a shallow gulch, her legs screaming, the smell of blood sweet and sharp beneath the lingering scent of wildfire. She blinked slowly, testing sensation. Her helmet was gone. So was her radio. Her left boot had split near the sole. She moved her fingers, still worked. Moved her leg, mistake. Lightning-hot pain bolted from ankle to thigh. She bit back a sound. The fire was gone now, burned through, moved northward with the wind. But the wilderness around her had turned to something unrecognizable, like a face once loved now lost to scars. Cass rolled onto her back, coughing once. The sky above was slate gray, veined with tendrils of smoke that drifted like ancient omens. She pulled herself to a sitting position, gingerly favoring the left leg. Her throat was dry, each breath catching. Her pack had landed nearby, blackened but intact. She reached for it and felt something shift behind her. Instinct took over. She froze. Not fear, yet. Just awareness. Something watched her. She could feel it like cold fingers brushing her neck. No movement. No sound. But it was there, patient, just beyond the tree line, or what was left of it. Cass reached slowly for the hatchet on her belt. The weight of it was both comfort and fiction. She was in no shape to defend herself. Whatever it was, if it meant harm, it would win. The feeling passed. Or retreated. Either way, she was alone again. Right, she muttered aloud, her voice hoarse, cracked. Alone. The sound of it didn't comfort her the way it used to. There had been a time when silence was sanctuary. When she'd craved it after the noise of fire engines, screaming radios, and the sobs of people who lost homes. But this was different. This was a silence too absolute, too ancient. She examined the injury. Not broken, at least not entirely. Swollen, definitely. Ligament damage, maybe. She bound it tightly, gritting her teeth, using strips from her undershirt. There was no cell signal, no GPS, no chopper above. Just miles of wilderness burned beyond recognition. Cass knew the terrain. At least, she used to. Before the fire had redrawn it in soot and ruin. The ridgeline had collapsed. Landmarks gone. Rivers rerouted. If she followed the sun west, she might find the canyon road. Or she might walk in circles until her body gave out. Still, she had 2 feet, 1 good leg, and a will that had carried her through things no one talked about. Things you buried like bodies. She limped north. Every step was a negotiation. Ash crunched beneath her soles, covering rocks, roots, and the fragile remnants of ferns. Birds had fled. Insects were silent. Even the wind was still. The only sound was the soft rasp of her breath and the occasional shift of something behind her. She didn't look back. Not yet. 2 hours passed. Maybe 3. Time was strange in burned woods, flat and endless. Her water was half gone, her stomach hollow. She paused at a tree that hadn't quite fallen and leaned against it, eyes closed. She remembered her brother then. Gabe had died 2 years back, overtaken in a canyon flare-up they hadn't seen coming. She was there. She'd heard his voice break over the radio, just once, and then the static. She hadn't fought fire the same way since. It was never just fire anymore. It was memory, chasing her through smoke. "You'd hate this," she whispered. "All this quiet. You'd make some dumb joke." She opened her eyes, and found tracks. Not hers. Fresh. Cass crouched with a wince. The prints were large. Wide pads. 4 claws. Too big for coyote. Too clean for bear. A wolf. Her chest tightened. There weren't supposed to be wolves this far south anymore. Not unless the fire had driven them from higher ground. The print was deep. The animal was big. And close. She followed the tracks. Not out of courage. More like inertia. They cut cleanly through the ash, purposeful, unhurried. She told herself it was foolish. Told herself the last thing she needed was to follow a predator deeper into nowhere. But she kept moving. Maybe because the print felt like a tether to something alive in this dead forest. Maybe because she was too tired to be afraid anymore. Evening fell, bringing with it a chill that wrapped around her bones. She found a small overhang of rock and collapsed beneath it. Started a fire the old way. Stripped bark, pine pitch, the stub of a flint kit she kept more from habit than belief. The fire sputtered, then caught. She huddled close, letting warmth settle over her like a prayer. The trees were skeletal shadows, and behind them, somewhere, the wolf moved. She knew it without seeing. It watched with the patience of something ancient, choosing when to appear. Cass didn't sleep so much as drift. Images blurred, her brother's grin, the flare of fire against red rock, the whisper of fur against pine. She woke just before dawn to the sound of snow. It was soft at first, just a hush in the air. Then the flakes came. Fine, dry powder drifting over the ruined forest like grace. The ground muted beneath it. Even the fire's last embers gave in without protest. She looked up, and saw him. The wolf. Not a hallucination. Not a shadow. He stood maybe 20 feet away, on the ridge above her shelter. Tall, proud, fur silvered with ash and snow. His eyes caught the firelight still faint in the embers. He didn't growl. Didn't blink. Just watched. Cass held his gaze. "You following me?" she asked softly, throat raw. The wolf tilted his head, as if to consider. Then turned, and vanished into the trees. She exhaled slowly. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. She stood, tested her weight. The leg throbbed, but held. The forest was remade in frost, the smoke now layered beneath white. And somewhere ahead, a wolf waited. Whether for her or for something else, she didn't know. But she followed anyway. The forest had grown quiet in a new way, no longer lifeless, but listening. Snow clung lightly to scorched branches like lace over ruins, a veil laid upon death. And in the hush that followed, the world seemed to breathe again, though slowly, like lungs waking after smoke. Cass limped through it, one step at a time, her breath visible in the cold. The fire's path had devoured everything in its reach. But here and there, signs of life. Shoots of grass untouched beneath fallen stone. A crow's feather. A tree with bark peeled but still rooted. She moved carefully, every footfall measured. Not for fear of collapse, but for reverence. There was something sacred about this aftermath, this burned cathedral of memory and survival. And then there were the tracks. She found them again just past the frost-glazed ravine, deep, unmistakable, pressed into soft ash and half-covered in snow. Wolf. Same as before. Same direction. The stride steady. Deliberate. She knelt, touching the edge of the print with her gloved hand. Still warm beneath. Recent. He's not wandering, she murmured. He's leading. The thought sat heavy in her chest. She adjusted the pack on her shoulders, eyes scanning the tree-line. Part of her wanted to turn back, not for fear, but because she didn't understand the rules anymore. She'd trained in fire and trauma and wilderness survival. She'd memorized wind patterns and escape routes and the stages of hypothermia. But this was myth. A lone wolf shadowing a broken firefighter through a dying forest, neither one speaking, both half alive. It made no sense. But neither did staying still. Midday bled into afternoon, the sun a dull blur behind smoke-tinted clouds. The terrain changed with the elevation. More boulders now, fewer fallen trees. The fire had moved fast here, the kind of wind-whipped inferno that left nothing but bone. Cass paused to rest at the base of a granite outcrop, sipping the last of her water and chewing on a protein bar that tasted like dust and chemicals. She caught her reflection in a shard of melted metal, cheeks smeared with ash, eyes hollow, lips cracked. She looked feral, unfamiliar, but her stare didn't waver. That woman staring back might have been a stranger, but she was still standing. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. She zipped her jacket higher and tucked her scarf tighter, wincing as the motion tugged at the bruised flesh along her ribs. Then, movement. To her left. She stilled. A rustle among the trees. Low. Predatory. She slid down the boulder, crouched low, every muscle alert. The wolf, she thought. But it wasn't. Too fast. Too sharp. Then she saw it, a flash of tawny fur, yellow eyes, sleek body. Not a wolf. Cougar. It moved low through the underbrush, tail flicking in the snow-dusted ash, barely a sound in its approach. Its gaze was locked on her. Hungry. Calculating. Cass reached for her hatchet, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The cougar inched closer. "Back off," she whispered, voice trembling. It didn't. She stood slowly, widening her stance. Raised the blade. And then, a snarl. From behind her. Not hers. The cougar froze. So did Cass. A blur of gray and muscle lunged from the left, colliding with the cougar in a mess of fur and fury. The sound was sickening, snaps, snarls, claws against earth. She backed away, heart pounding, hatchet still raised. The fight was fast and violent. Dust and snow kicked up in wild arcs. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The cougar bolted, bleeding and limping, vanishing into the tree-line. Silence returned, and the wolf stood where the cougar had been. Blood on his muzzle. Breathing heavy. He didn't look at her. He looked past her, as though seeing something far older than her body, deeper than flesh. Then he turned and limped slowly toward the north. Cass dropped to her knees, every nerve buzzing, not from fear, but awe. She stared after him. "You saved me," she whispered. The wolf didn't pause. That night, she built a fire with shaking hands and slept with her back to a stone wall, knife in hand, eyes on the stars. But she didn't dream of fire this time. She dreamt of snow. Of a gray shape running beside her, not leading, not chasing, just with. When she woke, there were prints in the ash again. A circle around her. Protective. Not too close. But there. She felt it like breath on her skin. You are not alone. The next 3 days passed in slow, rhythmic silence. She rationed food. Found a stream under thin ice. Set snares she learned to make years ago in the academy but had never needed. Caught nothing, but it gave her purpose. Direction. And always, the wolf was near. Once, she spotted him just before dusk, perched on a fallen pine above a clearing, watching deer move below. He made no sound. Just observed. Cass stayed back, crouched behind a snowbank, not wanting to interrupt the ritual. When the wolf finally descended, it wasn't to hunt. He simply moved on, steps light as dusk wind. "Why me?" she asked once, out loud, to the emptiness. "Why are you here?" The forest didn't answer. But the tracks did. They reappeared the next morning, this time closer. They curved around her campsite, lingered near her fire pit, then vanished uphill. She felt an urge rise in her like instinct. Follow. So she did. The climb was brutal. Her leg ached with each step. Her breath came hard, and sweat gathered beneath her scarf. But she moved. Slowly. Steadily. Higher. At the top, she found it. A cave. Not deep. Just a hollow in the rock wall, high above the forest floor. Inside, dry leaves, bones, the smell of old fur. The wolf's den. She stepped to the edge, not crossing the threshold. It didn't feel right. Instead, she crouched and stared into the hollow darkness, imagining him there, curled, silent, dreaming whatever wolves dream. "You're alone too," she whispered. The realization settled in like snowfall. He wasn't a guardian. Not a symbol. Not even a guide. He was just alone. Like her. Two things carved from different wars, but shaped by the same silence. She sat outside the den for hours, watching the trees below, her heart still. Not peaceful, just still. Like water after a storm. When the sun dipped low again, she heard a soft tread behind her. She didn't turn. "You live here," she said calmly. The wolf padded up beside her, his shadow long and lean in the dying light. He didn't sit. Didn't growl. Just stood close enough that she could hear his breath. They watched the valley together in silence. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. And she followed. Not because she had to, but because she understood. The fire had taken much. Her way home. Her bearings. Her brother, years before, but it felt fresh here. But something in this wilderness had chosen not to take her. Not yet. The tracks were still ahead. Still fresh. And though her boots were frayed and her body aching, she knew she could go a little farther. So she did. And behind her, the snow began to fall again. Soft, steady, unafraid. The hunger came quietly, like most dangers in the wilderness. Not with roaring emptiness, but with the slow unraveling of strength. Cass felt it in her fingertips first, numbness that lingered after the cold had passed. Then in her steps, which dragged a little more with each mile, and in her thoughts, which began looping like a tired song. She was running on habit now. Not hope. Not even survival. Just motion. The forest had become less treacherous, but no more generous. Snow had blanketed the sharp edges, softened the world into a muted silence, but there was no food, no shelter, no easy promise of rescue. Only trees, burned, blackened, or bent with ice, and the same steady set of paw prints always a little ahead, like a story unfolding one line at a time. She hadn't seen the wolf in 2 days, but he was still near. She felt it. The way the birds stayed gone. The way she never truly felt watched but never fully alone either. Something lingered between presence and absence, a thread tugged across miles of ash and snow. Cass reached the edge of a frozen creek by mid-morning, breath sharp in her lungs. She dropped to her knees beside the narrow flow of water beneath the ice, smashing through the top layer with a rock until her hands reached down for what passed for drinking water. She cupped the ice-cold melt into her mouth, letting it burn down her throat like fire. Her fingers ached from the cold, her lips cracked and bloody. Still, she drank. And drank. Then she saw it, half hidden beneath a crust of snow on the other side of the creek. A carcass. Deer. Partially picked over, ribs exposed, one hindquarter torn clean through. She approached cautiously. The kill wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. A day at most. No prints but wolf. large circles around the body, and one drag mark away. He had eaten. He had not finished. Cass looked down at the stiff meat, blood still frozen into the snow. Her stomach clenched in protest and yearning. She dropped to a knee, took out her knife, and began cutting. She built her fire near the base of a wind-fallen pine, shielding it from view. The smoke twisted up gently, a soft gray curl into the sky. The meat roasted unevenly, burned in parts and raw in others, but she ate anyway, greedily, tears leaking from her eyes as the warmth settled into her belly like something sacred. That night, the wolf returned. She saw his eyes first, glinting amber in the dark beyond the firelight. She didn't move, just kept her hands visible, the remains of the food untouched beside her. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, snow quiet under his paws. When he stopped a dozen feet away, he sat. Cass didn't speak. It felt wrong to break the moment with language. She simply took a piece of meat and set it on the rock beside the fire, then backed away. The wolf did not move at first. Then, cautiously, he stepped forward, sniffed, took the offering in his teeth, and retreated to the shadows. She didn't see him again until the next night. By then, she'd made it to the edge of what looked like a trail, an old ranger firebreak, barely visible under the snow. It was as close to a road as she could hope for. Her leg throbbed worse now, swollen beneath the wrapping, but she moved with new resolve. The food had changed something in her, woken something back up. She built camp beside a natural hollow in the earth, reinforced with branches and her tarp. The fire was modest, but steady. As night descended, she laid another piece of meat on the same rock. This time, she didn't look away. The wolf came slower, more direct. He paused at the edge of the light, eyes meeting hers, and then he stepped forward and ate in full view. Cass watched him. He was even larger than she'd thought, lean but powerful, with long legs and a deep chest, fur mottled with gray and white. Scars marked his flank and shoulder. His right ear was torn. This was no young pup. This was a survivor. She whispered the name into the dark without meaning to. Ash. The wolf looked up, head tilting slightly. Cass smiled faintly. Figured it fits. Ash stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked into the trees. The next morning, it snowed harder. Heavy flakes fell in silence, thickening the air until it felt like walking through memory. Cass moved slowly, her leg worse than ever, every step a calculated pain. But she followed the trail, winding up toward the old forest boundary line, and it was there, finally, that she found what felt like shelter. A cabin. Old, weathered, nearly collapsed on one side, but still standing. An abandoned fire lookout, from the days when people still patrolled these ridges instead of using satellites and drones. The door was jammed, but she kicked it in with a scream, collapsing inside and shutting the wind behind her. Dust and age greeted her. A broken cot. Rusted stove. Moldy logs. But it was enough. She cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. A steady release of salt and sound she hadn't known she'd been holding in. The kind of cry that had no shape, only weight. She made a fire in the stove. Ate her last piece of meat. Wrapped her leg in strips torn from the cot. Then, finally, she slept. It was near dawn when she woke. Something was at the door. She sat up, stiff and alert. A low, quiet whine. Cass opened the door. Ash stood there, covered in snow, his breath clouding in the morning air. She stepped aside. He didn't enter. Instead, he laid something down at her feet. A rabbit. Fresh kill. Then he turned and vanished into the trees. Cass stared at the rabbit. Her hands trembled. She picked it up, brought it inside, skinned it with slow reverence. Ate in silence, not just for hunger now, but for communion. The next few days blurred into a strange rhythm. The cabin became her sanctuary. Ash visited each night, sometimes just watching, sometimes leaving something near the door. Once, it was a hair. Once, the leg of a fawn. Always fresh. Always clean. She spoke to him now. Soft words. Nothing important. Things like, "Snow's thick tonight. I remembered something about Gabe today. He used to sing in the truck when no one was listening." "Thank you." Ash never responded. But he listened. And somehow, that was enough. One evening, the wind howled louder than usual, rattling the door. Cass bolted it shut, her fingers raw. The cold seeped through anyway, curling around her bones. She added more wood to the stove, but the warmth didn't hold. At some point during the night, she heard it, soft padding. Then a body against the door. Then stillness. She opened it, slowly. Ash was there, curled just outside. Snow had gathered on his back, unmoving. His eyes blinked slowly, sleepily. She didn't ask. She just left the door ajar, placed a blanket over the threshold, and let the fire burn brighter. By morning, he was gone. But the prints remained. Deep. Protective. Cass stood in the doorway, watching the horizon light up with the pale glow of another gray dawn. She knew the world hadn't changed. Her leg was still broken. The trail was still long. She might not even make it out. But she wasn't starving anymore. And she wasn't alone. And out there, beyond the trees, something wild and loyal and untamed moved in time with her. She stepped back into the cabin, letting the door close behind her. The howl came minutes later, low, long, resonant. Not warning. Not war. Just an echo. A promise. She sat down, sharpened her knife, and prepared for the next day. The snow had turned brittle overnight, the kind that crunched with finality underfoot. Cass stepped through it carefully, testing each placement with her weight, the splint on her leg rigid but steady. The sky above was blank. No clouds, no color. Just a vast pale emptiness that felt like it had forgotten the world below. The wind had stilled, but its memory clung to the trees, stripping them bare of illusion. She had left the cabin behind at dawn. Not because it wasn't safe, it was, but because something in her had begun to stir again. Not restlessness. Not desperation. Something quieter. Forwardness. A current that tugged not toward comfort, but closure. Her body wasn't healed, not by any stretch, but her spirit no longer felt like it was bleeding out. The wolf had not come the night before. She had waited until the fire burned low, had listened for the soft pad of his arrival, had even stepped outside, standing barefoot on snow as the coals behind her faded. But he hadn't appeared. It wasn't abandonment. She knew that. It was instinct. He had led her here. He had shared his food, his presence, his silence. But he didn't owe her anything. He never had. So she walked. The ranger line was clearer now, cut between the thickets with the rough hand of old maintenance. Marker stones barely visible beneath the drifts guided her path. It was a route meant for emergencies, one they joked about in training but never truly used. Now, it was her thread out. Every few hundred yards, she saw signs of him. Not fresh, but unmistakable. Tracks. A scrape on bark. Once, a broken branch still marked with fur. She followed not to catch him, but because it was the direction her heart leaned toward. Midday, the sun cracked briefly through the haze, lighting the forest with a thin gold blade of warmth. Cass stopped then, just to feel it on her face. Her eyes closed. She could almost hear her brother again, Gabe laughing as he tossed a flask into his duffel, saying, "You're too serious, Monroe. When this job eats you, just remember where your name ends and the fire begins." She had never understood that until now. Where the fire begins is not always where destruction starts. Sometimes it's where something fierce and enduring is born. The sound of the helicopter came just before dusk. A low, distant thrum, rhythmic and deliberate. Mechanical wings slicing through still air. She froze, her heart catching in her throat, and looked up toward the ridge beyond the valley curve. They were searching. And they were close. Cass fumbled for the flare in her pack. Bright red, wrapped in rubber. One strike. One hope. But the wind shifted, and the snow picked up again, fast and fierce, whiting out the slope above. She had seconds. She moved fast, grabbing kindling from her belt and packing it around a cluster of dry bark beneath a bent pine. She struck the flare and shoved it into the base. It flared to life, angry, red, beautiful. The smoke rose upward in sharp, desperate lines. The helicopter passed once, too far. Then again, lower. She screamed, waved her arms, prayed. It banked, slowed. She dropped to her knees. Relief came as a collapse, not a celebration. Every muscle let go at once. Tears spilled, not from joy, but from something heavier. Survival was not always triumphant. Sometimes it just was. The chopper hovered, wind blasting the treetops below. She shielded her face as ropes dropped, as voices barked through static. A figure descended, helmeted, harnessed, hands reaching. "Cass Monroe," he yelled. She nodded, barely able to say yes. "We got you." He strapped her in, and she clutched the pack tight against her chest, her gaze darting to the trees. The dark space where the wolf might have been. Nothing. As they lifted, she looked down. The forest stretched below, burned and quiet and beautiful in its ruin. And just before they disappeared into the fog, she saw him. A gray shape at the edge of the tree-line, still as stone. Watching. Her breath caught. She raised her hand, just once. He didn't move. But she felt it all the same. Goodbye. In the hospital, the days passed in clean white sheets and antiseptic light. Her leg was reset. Her lungs cleared. Report after report was filed. Psych evaluations administered. Words like delirium and hallucination floated around her. She smiled at them without comment. She healed. But the part of her that mattered had already been changed in a place no scan could find. When they finally let her go, she didn't return to the station. She didn't answer the calls. She disappeared to the edge of the mountains, rented a small cabin near the tree line, and stayed there, quietly, simply, breathing again. Sometimes she walked the firebreak trails with her limp a little softer each week. Sometimes she left meat on a flat rock near the ridge. Once, just once, she came outside and found it gone. And in the snow beside it, a single paw print. Deep. Unmistakable. She stood there for a long time, the cold biting her fingertips, a smile blooming slow and private across her face. There were no more fires to fight. But there was still the snow. Still the silence. Still the bond between two creatures that had found each other not in need, but in mirror. Cass looked to the horizon. And for the first time in years, she howled. If this journey of unexpected companionship touched you, subscribe and join us for more stories like these waiting to be told.